Carol Pruitt had exactly 43 minutes to become someone she no longer remembered how to be. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her small apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, staring at the woman looking back at her with the particular kind of exhaustion that no amount of concealer could fully hide. The overhead light buzzed faintly, the way it always did after 8 o'clock, and somewhere down the hall her 7-year-old daughter Penny was arguing with the television about the rules of a game show she didn't quite understand. The sound was warm and familiar, and for a moment Carol just closed her eyes and let it fill the space around her like something she could hold on to. "You're going on a date," she whispered to her reflection, "a real one, with a real person." The words felt foreign in her mouth. Not wrong. Exactly. Just unused. Like a language she had once been fluent in and had slowly, quietly forgotten over the course of 3 years of early mornings, packed lunches, parent-teacher conferences attended alone, and Friday nights that ended before 9 with a novel she was too tired to read. She was 31 years old. She wore a beige sweater more often than not. She owned one good pair of black slacks and a watch her mother had given her when she graduated from nursing school. And those were the things she had on right now, because this was the nicest version of herself she could put together on a Tuesday evening with 43 minutes and a babysitter who charged by the hour. Her friend Dana had arranged this. Dana, who was relentless and well-meaning and absolutely impossible to say no to, had called her 3 weeks ago with what she described as a very casual, very low-pressure, completely harmless blind date, and had not stopped following up since. Carol had said no twice. She had said maybe once. She had said fine in a moment of weakness during a 12-hour nursing shift when she was running on coffee and stubbornness, and Dana had immediately confirmed everything before Carol could take it back. "His name is Grant," Dana had told her. "He's a friend of Marcus's. He's kind, he's successful, and he specifically asked to meet someone real." Those were his words, Carol. Someone real. Carol hadn't asked what that meant. She was too tired. She just wrote down the name of the restaurant, Hartwell's, a quiet place on the north side of the city she'd never been to, but had passed a dozen times and always assumed was for other people. And she told herself she would cancel by Sunday. She hadn't cancelled. Now she smoothed her sweater, picked up her purse, and walked down the hall to where her babysitter, a college sophomore named Bree, was already settled on the couch with Penny tucked under her arm, both of them fully absorbed in the game show. "Mommy, that man just won a refrigerator," Penny announced without looking up. "That's wonderful, baby. Can we win a refrigerator?" "We have a refrigerator. Ours makes that noise." "I know." Carol kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and something slightly crayon adjacent. "I'll be back by 10. 9:30 if this goes the way I think it will." Bree looked up with the bright, slightly pitying expression of someone 20 years old, watching a 31-year-old leave the house looking uncertain. "You look great, Carol." "I look like a nurse going to dinner," Carol said, but she smiled anyway. The restaurant was a 20-minute drive. She took the long way without meaning to, circling the park on 4th Street because the traffic light at the intersection had always been slow, and she'd never quite broken the habit of avoiding it, even now, when she wasn't in a hurry. The city was settling into its evening rhythm around her. People walking dogs, a couple arguing quietly on a stoop, a food truck with a line 3 people deep. Columbus in October had a particular smell to it, something between cold pavement and fallen leaves and the exhaust from the highway 2 miles west, and she had always found it oddly comforting, this city that wasn't glamorous, but was entirely, stubbornly itself. She pulled into the parking lot at Hartwell's at 7 minutes past 7 and sat in her car for 90 seconds. Someone real. That was what he'd asked for. She wondered what that said about the people he usually met. She wondered what it said about her, that the phrase had stayed with her for 3 weeks. Inside, the restaurant was warm and unhurried, the kind of place where the lighting was low enough to be forgiving and the tables were spaced far enough apart that conversations could breathe. A hostess led her to a corner table near a window that looked out over a small courtyard lit with string lights, and Carol had just settled into her chair and set her purse on the seat beside her when she looked up and saw him walking toward her from across the room. She recognized the type before she recognized the person, The particular kind of man who moves through a public space with the quiet, unstudied confidence of someone who has never once had to wonder whether he belonged in the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit with the top button of his shirt open in a way that suggested the tie had been removed recently and deliberately. His hair was dark and pushed back from his face, and he had the kind of jaw that looked like it had been constructed with a specific purpose in mind. He was objectively extraordinarily good-looking, and Carol felt the particular kind of panic that strikes a woman wearing a beige sweater when she suddenly realizes she is underdressed for her own evening. He saw her. He didn't hesitate. He walked directly to the table, extended his hand, and said, "Carol, I'm Grant Mercer. I'm sorry if I kept you waiting." His voice was lower than she expected, quieter. There was no performance in it. "You didn't," she said. "I was early." A pause. 7 minutes late, actually, but that's still early for me. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one beginning. He sat down across from her, and in the warm light of the restaurant, Carol could see that he was older than the easy confidence suggested. There were fine lines around his eyes, and something in his expression that read less like ease and more like a man who had learned to wear ease as a kind of protection. He was watching her with a directness she wasn't used to, the sort of attention that didn't wander toward his phone or the room or anything else, and it made her feel simultaneously seen and slightly off balance, the way you feel when someone adjusts the focus of a lens you didn't know was blurry. "Dana told me you're a nurse, he said. "Pediatric unit. 6 years. She picked up the menu, mostly for something to do with her hands. "She told me you're in real estate. Among other things." He said it without elaboration, and she got the sense that elaboration was available if she wanted it and that he was simply waiting to find out whether she did. She looked up from the menu. "What does among other things mean exactly?" He met her eyes. "It means I own some buildings, some companies, some things I probably have too many of and don't use enough." Another almost smile. "It's not as interesting as it sounds." It sounds like something someone says when it is exactly as interesting as it sounds and they're testing to see if you'll push back. This time the smile arrived fully, and it changed his face in a way that was difficult to look away from. It made him look briefly like someone who was genuinely surprised by something and genuinely pleased about it. "Fair enough," he said. The waiter came. They ordered. The courtyard outside the window glowed gold through the glass, and the restaurant hummed softly around them with other people's conversations, and Carol settled back slightly in her chair and thought, "Okay, this is fine, this is just two people having dinner." And then Grant Mercer set down his water glass, looked at her across the table, and said the one thing she hadn't expected anyone to say to her in 3 years. "So," he said quietly, "how are you actually doing? Not what do you do or where are you from or tell me about yourself, the standard safe geography of a first date, just that. How are you actually doing?" With the weight of the word actually sitting right in the middle of it, like he meant it to land exactly where it did. Carol opened her mouth, closed it, felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. She had no idea what she was about to say. Carol had a rehearsed answer for most first-date questions. She had been working on it quietly, unconsciously, during the 3 weeks between Dana's phone call and this Tuesday evening. A kind of internal script that sounded honest, without being vulnerable, warm without being needy, open without being the sort of open that made people lean back slightly in their chairs and reassess the evening. She had it ready. It involved something about loving her job, something brief and cheerful about Penny, and a pivot toward asking about him before anything got too personal. She didn't use it. "Honestly?" she said. The word came out smaller than she intended. "I don't remember the last time someone asked me that and actually wanted an answer." Grant didn't move. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance or nervous laughter. He just waited, his hands folded loosely on the table. And the patience in his posture was so complete and so unhurried that it felt almost physical, like a door held open with no sign of impatience about whether or not you chose to walk through it. So she did. "I'm tired," she said, not in a bad way necessarily. "Just Tired in the way that you get when every single day has 30 things in it, and 29 of them are for someone else, and the one that's for you is usually just remembering to drink enough water. She paused. That sounds worse than I meant it to. It sounds honest, he said. I have a daughter, Penny. She's 7. Carol reached for her water glass, mostly for the motion of it. Her father and I separated when she was 4. It was the right decision. It turns out the right decisions are sometimes also the hard ones, and nobody really prepares you for how long the hard part lasts. She hadn't meant to say that much. She glanced up, half expecting to find the particular expression she had learned to recognize on the faces of men who had asked a polite question and received more than they budgeted for. But Grant's expression hadn't changed. He was still watching her with that same quiet, level attention, and there was nothing in it that looked like exit planning. How long has it been? He asked. 3 years since we separated. 2 since the divorce was finalized. A beat. 14 months since I last went on a date, which ended at 8:15 when the man across from me spent 20 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to me in a tone that suggested I had never encountered a number before. Grant's mouth curved. Did you know about cryptocurrency before that evening? I have a working understanding of most things, Carol said, and the dry flatness in her voice made him actually laugh, a real one, quiet but genuine, the kind that starts in the chest and doesn't perform itself for the room. I'll keep that in mind, he said. The food arrived. They ate slowly, the way people do when eating has become secondary to something else, and the conversation moved the way good conversations do, when neither person is managing it. Not in a straight line, but in loops and turns, doubling back on itself, surprising both of them with where it ended up. She told him about Penny's obsession with game shows and her habit of narrating the family's daily activities, as though producing a documentary for an invisible audience. He told her about growing up in Cincinnati, the second of 3 sons, in a household where ambition was the primary language and tenderness was considered a mild character flaw. That explains some things, Carol said. He looked at her. Which things? The way you carry yourself, like you're used to being watched but not necessarily seen. She said it without cruelty, almost offhandedly, the way she sometimes said things to patients that were more accurate than tactful. Sorry. Occupational habit. Nurses notice things. Don't apologize, he said, and his voice had shifted slightly. Not colder, but more careful. You're not wrong. She studied him across the table, in the warm light, with his jacket now draped over the back of his chair, and his expression less guarded than it had been 40 minutes ago. He looked different than the man who had walked across the restaurant toward her. Still handsome in that precise architectural way, but there were shadows under the surface of it now. Not darkness exactly, but depth, the kind that accumulates in a person over years of something. Dinah said you specifically asked for someone real, Carol said. I've been curious about that since she told me. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. I've been on a lot of dates in the past 2 years, he said. Arranged ones, mostly. My assistant, my business partners, a woman at my gym who I think meant well. Everyone has someone they think would be perfect. He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth. And the women are always impressive, successful, educated, interesting by any reasonable measure. But there's a version that keeps showing up, a version of the evening where everyone is performing the best possible draft of themselves, and neither person ever says anything that costs them anything. Carol considered this. And you're tired of it. I'm tired of leaving a dinner that looked perfect on paper and feeling like I'd spent 2 hours talking to a photograph of a person. What made you think I would be different? He looked at her directly. I didn't. Dana said you'd probably cancel, and that if you didn't, you'd spend the first 20 minutes looking for the exit. She said you were the most genuinely herself person she knew, and that you were going to hate being here. A pause. She was about half right. Carol laughed despite herself. Which half? You're not looking for the exit anymore. She realized with some surprise that he was correct. They had been at the restaurant for an hour and 40 minutes. The courtyard outside had darkened, the string lights brighter now against the October night, and the restaurant had thinned around them without either of them noticing. Their plates had been cleared. Somewhere behind the kitchen door someone was laughing. a long, bright sound that rolled through the wall and disappeared. "Can I ask you something?" Carol said. "Yes." "Why aren't you married?" The question was direct enough that it sat on the table for a second between them, and Carol had the brief, familiar sensation of having said the honest thing in a room that expected the careful thing. Grant didn't flinch, but something in him shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way a building settles rather than moves. "I was engaged," he said, 4 years ago, to a woman named Patricia. We were together for 6 years, engaged for 8 months. He paused. She left 3 weeks before the wedding. Carol said nothing. She had the nurse's understanding of silence, that sometimes the most useful thing you can do is not fill it. "The official reason was that she wasn't ready," he continued. "The real reason, which took me about 2 years to understand, was that I had built a life around success as a substitute for presence. I was always available in every way except the one that mattered." He said it without self-pity, which was somehow worse. She wasn't wrong to leave. I was wrong to make leaving the only option available to her. The words sat in the air between them, clean and undefended. Carol looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at patients when she was trying to understand not just the symptom, but the person carrying it. She saw the expensive suit and the easy posture and the practiced quiet. And underneath all of it, she saw something she recognized with a vividness that was almost startling. A person who had made a painful mistake, understood it fully, and was still figuring out what to do with that understanding. "That's a hard thing to say out loud to someone you just met," she said. "You told me about your divorce 40 minutes in." "Fair point." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes in a way that made her breath catch very slightly and unexpectedly. The way you catch your breath at the edge of something you didn't see coming. Not fear, but the close cousin of it. The waiter appeared with the dessert menu. Neither of them took it. Grant looked at Carol across the table with an expression she couldn't quite name, and she had the sudden, irrational, entirely inconvenient feeling that something was happening here that she had not planned for and could not manage her way out of. Then his phone, which had sat face down and untouched on the table for the entire evening, lit up. He glanced at it once, and something changed in his face, fast, involuntary, the kind of change that happens before composure has a chance to catch up. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need to make a call. 2 minutes." He stood, and Carol watched him walk toward the far end of the restaurant, his jaw set and his hand already at his ear, and she thought, there it is. There's the thing that's been waiting in the wings this whole evening. She just had no idea yet what it was. He was gone for 4 minutes, not 2. Carol didn't check her phone while she waited. She had learned over years of sitting in hospital waiting rooms and school pickup lines and the particular suspended silence of 2 a.m. when Penny had a fever, that the impulse to fill empty moments with a screen was usually just anxiety, wearing a practical disguise. So instead, she looked out through the window at the courtyard, at the string lights reflecting off the dark pavement below, and she thought about what Grant had said. I had built a life around success as a substitute for presence. She knew that sentence, not from her own life exactly, but from the life she had watched her ex-husband construct around himself during the 5 years they were together. The way Marcus had always been working toward the next thing, the next promotion, the next version of good enough, and how by the time Penny arrived, the distance between them had grown so gradual and so consistent that neither of them had noticed it becoming permanent until it already was. She had told herself for a long time that the failure of her marriage was a specific personal thing, a particular incompatibility between 2 particular people. But sitting here now, hearing a stranger describe the same architecture of absence in different words, she felt something loosen slightly in her chest, the relief, quiet and unexpected, of recognition. When Grant came back to the table, his expression was composed, but composed in the specific way of someone who has just spent 4 minutes assembling composure from whatever was available. "I'm sorry," he said again, sitting down. "Everything okay?" He looked at her for a moment, and she could see him deciding something, the small, precise calculation of how much to say. "My younger brother," he said. "He's been having a difficult year. He calls sometimes when things get to a certain point." A pause. He's okay. I just needed to hear that he was okay. Carol absorbed this. How many brothers do you have? 2. Derek is 34. He's the one who just called. Ryan is 29 and currently living in Portland, doing something with wood that he insists is furniture design, and I'm told is going very well. And Derek? Grant looked at the table. Derek has struggled with depression since his mid-20s. He's had good years and bad years. This one has been harder than most. He said it carefully, in the way of someone who has learned to talk about a painful thing without making the talking itself into a performance of pain. He called to say goodnight mostly. He does that sometimes. Carol felt something move through her that was not quite pity and not quite tenderness, but contained elements of both. That's a good thing, Maya, she said, that he calls. I know. I used to miss those calls sometimes. Early on when I was... He stopped, adjusted. When I was the kind of person who missed things. He looked up. I don't miss them anymore. She believed him. The waiter came again, this time with the quiet persistence of someone wrapping up an evening shift, and they ordered coffee without discussing it, the easy, unconscious synchrony of two people who have stopped negotiating the small decisions. And then Carol said, Dana didn't just tell you I was real, did she? It wasn't a question. Grant looked at her steadily. No. What else did she tell you? A beat of silence, not evasive, but honest. She told me you've been carrying a lot alone for a long time. She told me you don't ask for help, ever, for reasons that made complete sense once and don't serve you as well anymore. He paused. And she told me that the last man you went on a date with talked about cryptocurrency for 20 minutes. She had no business telling you any of that. Probably not. He didn't apologize for it. But she did it because she loves you, and because she wanted me to understand who I was actually meeting. Carol was quiet for a moment, working through the particular mix of irritation and gratitude that Dana reliably produced in her. The irritation was real. So was the gratitude. That was the thing about Dana. She was always doing the wrong thing for exactly the right reasons, and it was exhausting to stay angry at her for longer than about 40 seconds. She gave you a head start, Carol said finally. She gave me context. The rest of this evening has been you. The coffee arrived. Outside the window, the courtyard was empty now, the string light still burning gold against the dark. Carol wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at Grant across the small geography of the table. This man she had known for less than 2 hours, who had walked toward her across a restaurant with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere, and had then proceeded to spend the evening saying things that cost him something. And she felt with a clarity that was slightly alarming in its specificity that she did not want this evening to end. The feeling scared her enough that she almost said something cautious, something that would reinstall the appropriate distance. Instead, she said, "Tell me something nobody knows about you." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant ask for a first date. You already told me about your broken engagement and your brother's depression. I think we're past the small talk threshold." He was quiet for a moment. "Then I cook, properly. Not reheating things, not ordering in. I actually cook, Sunday mornings usually. I have a kitchen that cost more than most people's cars, and I use it every single weekend, alone, for 2 to 3 hours. It's the only time in my week when nobody needs anything from me and I'm not looking at a phone." A pause. "I've told exactly 3 people that in the last 5 years. Carol looked at him. "Why is that the secret one?" "Because it's the thing that's just mine. Everything else I own, people know about, the buildings, the companies, the apartment." He said it simply, without bitterness. "The cooking is just mine." She understood that completely. She thought about the 40 minutes on Sunday afternoons when Penny was at her mother's, and Carol sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a book and did not speak to anyone or answer anything, and how she had never once described those 40 minutes to another person, because describing them would have required explaining how desperately she needed them, and that felt like an admission she wasn't ready to make. "I have 40 minutes on Sunday afternoons," she said. "Just mine. What do you do with them?" "Nothing, that's the whole point." He smiled at that, the full one, the one that changed his face. and something passed between them across the table that was not dramatic and not cinematic, and did not announce itself in any way. It was just a moment of two people recognizing something in each other, quiet and certain. The way you recognize a word in a language you thought you'd forgotten. Carol's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Bree. Penny's asleep, no rush, all good. She turned it face down. My daughter is asleep, she said. My babysitter says no rush. Do you want to stay? Yes, she said, simply, without hedging. The word surprised her with how easily it arrived. Yes, I do. And that was when the door of the restaurant opened, and a woman walked in, wearing a camel-colored coat and dark heels, and the particular expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not expect to find complicated. Carol noticed her only because the woman had stopped just inside the entrance and was looking directly at their table, directly at Grant, with an expression that moved through recognition, then something sharper and less composed, before she rearranged her face and looked away. Grant had his back to the door. He didn't see her. But Carol did, and Carol, who was very good at reading faces, understood immediately that whatever that look contained, it was not casual. The woman was seated at a table across the restaurant. She didn't look over again. She picked up the menu with practiced steadiness and kept her eyes down, and everything about her posture said, I am fine. I am not affected. I am not here because of anything. Carol looked back at Grant, who was talking about the coffee and whether it was worth ordering a second cup, entirely unaware. She thought, I should probably mention that. She thought, I should absolutely mention that. She picked up her own cup instead and told herself it was nothing, and the feeling in her chest that said otherwise was something she chose, for the next 11 minutes, to ignore. 11 minutes later, Grant excused himself to use the restroom. He crossed the restaurant. He passed the table where the woman in the camel coat was sitting. He stopped. Carol watched it happen from across the restaurant. Grant had stopped beside the woman's table, not dramatically, not with the stiff body language of confrontation, but with the quiet stillness of someone who has encountered something unexpected and is choosing, very deliberately, how to respond to it. The woman in the camel coat looked up from her menu. Her composure, which had been so carefully constructed since she walked through the door, slipped for just a moment, not long, barely a second, and in that second Carol saw everything she needed to see. The way the woman's chin lifted slightly, defensive and proud. The way her hands came together on the table as though she needed something to hold. The way she and Grant looked at each other with the specific loaded silence of two people who share a history that never fully resolved. Carol set down her coffee cup. She was not a dramatic person. She had spent 3 years building a life that was stable and manageable and free of the kind of turbulence that had characterized the last years of her marriage. And she had done it deliberately, brick by brick, with the patient determination of someone who understands that stability is not glamorous, but that it is the thing that keeps a 7-year-old girl's world from tilting. She was not going to sit across a restaurant and spiral into conclusions about a man she had known for 2 hours. But she was also a nurse who read people for a living, and what she had just read was not nothing. Grant spoke to the woman for perhaps 90 seconds. Carol could not hear the words. She watched his posture, calm, not cold, the way he had been with her all evening, and she watched the woman's expression move through several things before landing on something that looked, from this distance, like a controlled version of grief. Then Grant said something short and final, and he walked to the restroom, and the woman in the camel coat looked down at her menu and did not look up again. When Grant returned to the table, he sat down, looked at Carol, and said, "That was Patricia." Carol blinked. "You're Patricia?" "My former fiancée, yes." He said it without drama, which was its own kind of remarkable. "She's in town for work. She comes to Columbus twice a year. I didn't know she came here." "Did she know you came here?" A brief pause. "I don't know." Carol considered this with the careful, clear-eyed honesty she applied to most things. How did that feel? Seeing her? He thought about it, genuinely, not performing consideration, but actually taking the questions seriously, the way she was learning he took most things. "Familiar," he said, "and finished. both at once. He looked at her directly. "I don't want you to think that this," he gestured slightly between them, "is complicated by that. It isn't. But I didn't want to not tell you, because I've spent enough of my life not telling people things that mattered, and I'm trying very hard not to do that anymore." Carol looked at him across the table. The restaurant had grown quiet around them, most of the other tables empty now, the staff moving with the gentle efficiency of people easing toward closing time. The string lights in the courtyard still burned outside the window, patient and gold. "Okay," she said, "okay, I believe you." She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. "And I appreciate that you told me, genuinely." Something in his shoulders eased. It was slight, barely visible, but she caught it because she caught most things. They stayed for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing significant. His brother's good years. Her mother, who lived 40 minutes south of Columbus and arrived unannounced on Saturdays with food Carol hadn't asked for, and opinions she hadn't requested, and love so dense and reliable that Carol had stopped being irritated by it and started being quietly, enormously grateful for it. Penny's documentary narration of daily life, which had recently expanded to include weather commentary and brief editorial reviews of dinner. When they finally stood to leave, Grant helped her with her coat in the unhurried, natural way of someone who does things because they are the right things to do and not because they are being watched. Outside, the October air had sharpened into genuine cold, and their breath made small clouds in the dark. They stood in the parking lot, not quite ready to separate the evening from whatever came next. "I'd like to see you again," Grant said, "if you're open to it." Carol looked at him. She thought about Penny asleep on the couch under Bree's watch. She thought about Sunday mornings in a kitchen and 40 minutes of necessary nothing. She thought about the particular loneliness of sitting in a hospital cafeteria, on a break, and realizing you have 17 people to text but no one you want to call. She thought about how the word actually in the question, "How are you actually doing?" had landed in her chest like a key finding a lock she'd forgotten was there. "I'm open to it," she said. He smiled. "Then I'll call you. Not have my assistant call you. Me." "I'd like that." She drove home with the heater on and the radio off, and somewhere on 4th Street, she passed the park and the slow traffic light, and she was smiling without knowing when it had started. 3 weeks passed. Grant called the next morning, not his assistant, him, at 8:15, which was either audacious or entirely sincere, and she decided to believe it was the latter. They talked for 22 minutes while Penny ate cereal and provided running commentary on a cartoon, and Carol stood at the kitchen window, watching the neighbor's cat perform its slow, imperious survey of the back fence. They had dinner again that Friday, and the following Wednesday, and twice the week after that, in the easy, accumulating way of something that has found its own rhythm and doesn't need to be managed. He met Penny on a Sunday afternoon in early November, at Carol's kitchen table, over grilled cheese sandwiches that Carol made, and Penny evaluated with the grave professional seriousness of someone taking the responsibility very seriously. Grant sat across from her 7-year-old daughter in his dark jacket and answered every question put to him without condescension or performance. Yes, he had a dog once. No, he didn't currently. Yes, he thought the contestant on last week's game show should have taken the money instead of risking it. And yes, he agreed that the refrigerator they currently owned was deeply suspicious. Penny declared him acceptable. This was, Carol knew, not a small thing. In December, Grant took them both to a Christmas market downtown. Penny in a red wool coat she'd been given by Carol's mother, Grant with his hands in the pockets of a dark overcoat that probably cost more than Carol's monthly rent. All three of them moving through the stalls of pine boughs and handmade ornaments and hot chocolate in paper cups. At one point, Penny reached up and took Grant's hand without asking. The natural, unself-conscious gesture of a child who has decided someone is safe, and Carol watched Grant look down at that small hand in his, with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something unguarded and wide open, something that looked like a man encountering a feeling he had not expected and had no defenses prepared for. He looked up and found Carol watching him. He didn't look away. That evening, after Penny was in bed and Bree had gone home, and the apartment was quiet with the particular softness of a December night. Grant and Carol sat on her small couch with cups of tea. His idea, which she had found unexpectedly charming, and he said something she had not anticipated. "I want to tell you what I said to Penny today, when you were at the hot chocolate stand." Carol turned to look at him. "She didn't tell me you said anything." "She won't. I asked her to keep it between us for a little while." He held his cup in both hands, and for the first time in all the weeks she had known him, he looked slightly uncertain. "But I want you to know, because you should," he told her. Penny had asked him with the direct simplicity of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned that some questions are not asked. "Do you like my mom?" And Grant had said, "Yes, very much." "Your mom is one of the most genuinely herself people I have ever met, and I think she is extraordinary, and I hope she'll let me keep showing up until she believes that too." And Penny, who had considered this with the gravity it deserved, had said, "She probably will. But you should know she cries at game shows sometimes." And Grant had said, "So do I." Carol sat very still on the couch for a moment after he finished speaking. She could feel the tight, particular pressure behind her eyes that arrived whenever something broke through the careful, practical composure she had been maintaining for 3 years. Not a dam breaking, nothing that dramatic, just a small, specific loosening. The kind that happens when something you have been quietly waiting for, longer than you realized, finally, gently, arrives. She didn't cry, but it was a near thing. "For you told my 7-year-old that I'm extraordinary," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. She asked a direct question. I gave her a direct answer. "Grant, Carol." She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady and unhurried and entirely, completely present. The one thing she understood now, he had been learning to become for years. "I'm not good at this," she said quietly, "at letting someone in. I've gotten very comfortable being the person who handles everything herself." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to stop being that person. I'm just asking if there's room for someone to stand next to her sometimes." The question was so simple. The question was the exact right question. Outside, the December night pressed quietly against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, Penny was asleep, probably dreaming of game shows and refrigerators and the comfortable, ordinary magic of a life where things were, slowly and improbably, becoming more than enough. Carol reached over and took Grant Mercer's hand. "Yes," she said, "there is." And in the small, warm kitchen of an apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, two people who had both